So next up, David Phillips. So David's a partner at SR1. As I'm sure you know, SR1 is the corporate venture capital arm of GSK. David, I see, joined SR1 in 2008, where he started out incubating and spinning out technologies from GSK, which I think is something which has become quite fashionable again in pharma, and then moved to European investments. So David has a long track record on the commercial and business side, which he's used, I can see, to great success in setting up companies. And he's going to talk to us now about what is the value of pharma open innovation. David.
Thank you, Jane, for the introduction. So I'm a GSK returnee, so I came back to GSK in 2008, having been with them from 1981, showing my age, till 1996. Went out to the biotech world to make my fortune, like down the Yellow Brick Road. It didn't happen, so I'm now back on the payroll in GSK. But I had a lot of fun with Cambridge Combinatorial, Argenta, the automation partnership, and a lot of stuff that happened around the Cambridge area, which was a lot of fun. I was just going to say two things. I took my dad, so after Eric's presentation, I took my dad to the memory clinic on Wednesday. It was just hilarious. We're in the memory clinic and we're in the waiting room, and there's about 15 people in the waiting room. My dad leant across in a very loud voice and said, "David, can you remind me, why are we here again?" And he's in the early stages of dementia, but he just takes it all very, very humorously. And I have to say, the whole place just sort of collapsed with laughter, So, and he was a bit tense going into the memory clinic. So the only other thing I was going to say before I start my presentation was Hakan, my fellow panelist here, is a long-term friend, works with MS Ventures, is busted his knee. So I'm sure he's going to tell you more about his diagnosis and the prospects. But I'm a golfer, and I'm just massively jealous because he's being golf carted through airports continuously over the last 2 weeks. And I just always wanted to do that. And I'm just always jealous of these people with these beeping trolleys going through the airport. So Hakan, I'm going to come back with you. I want to be on that trolley with you going through the airport. So anyway, on to more serious stuff. I'm going to talk a little bit about, Jennifer talked about open innovation. I'm going to give you a specific example of how GSK sees open innovation from our perspective with a company we've incubated on the Stevenage Bioscience Catalyst recently. And this company is called Regenerative. This is a regenerative medicine company. And the reason, and this is a really interesting case study, because how do we get deal flow into venture capital? This was brought to us by the Regenerative Medicine DPU in GSK. So Jason Gardner, who now runs our virtual discovery operation in Boston for GSK, came to us and said, look, we've screened a lot of cell therapy companies, a lot of small molecule companies in regenerative medicine. We really like this. It's a little bit early. It needs some more incubation. It needs some more funding. But if you guys could help us and get this to a point that's really interesting, we think this could be, massive for the industry, not just for GSK, but for the industry in general. So we seed funded this company in 2011, and I'll tell you a little bit about it. So the attitude within pharma around that time was they were a little bit scared of cell therapy. So the thought was regulatory risk, clinical risk, CMC, manufacturing costs, a lot of spooky stuff around cell therapy. And I know a lot of that has been worked on really carefully. But we are very comfortable in big pharma in our comfort zone, which is nice round white tablets, small molecules. We know the cost of goods is going to be okay, and we've got a trusted regulatory and clinical pathway. And so one of the premises about this company was how could you impact regenerative medicine using a small molecule technology? And the way this company has done this through its technology is by identifying the rare progenitor cells that then terminally differentiate into the tissue that you're trying to generate. And if you can stimulate that with a small molecule, that's an incredibly efficient way of stimulating the body's own inherent systems to be able to do that. By the way, the reason I'm looking at the slides is because at my age, in mid-50s, I can't actually see the screen down there. So we think regenerative medicine is the future, and GSK's looked really critically at what happens if you come up with curative medicines. So I'll talk to you in a minute about things like osteoarthritis, where if we can stimulate the body's own regenerative system to regenerate cartilage, that would be an absolutely massive game-changing shift for the industry. And we're looking at small molecules where the development pathway is an awful lot simpler, and molecules that can touch the endogenous resident progenitor cells to then differentiate into the tissue you're chasing is incredibly attractive. And when we looked at the business plan originally, they came to us with obesity, diabetes, and a number of other cell types. But we've really gone back and looked at the innate biology and said, what evidence is there that the innate biology is still intact and that you could interrupt that system and actually regenerate the tissue using a small molecule? It's happened before, and so what was interesting was Patrick Vallance went to this company when Jason brought it to the company about 2010 and said, okay, we've got Promacta, which generates blood cells, so can you go away and find the progenitor cell that terminally differentiates into blood cells? In other words, could you rediscover the mechanism of action of that drug? So they went away, they isolated and purified the progenitor cells, and then what we did, we gave them a library to screen, about a 200 compound library with Promacta spiked in that library. And not only did they discover Promacta, but a bunch of analogues around that. So they demonstrated in a couple of proof of concept studies with GSK that they could find these rare, difficult to find precursor cells. And I'll come to the de-risking and why we think this is a really interesting model shortly. So we've demonstrated that. It's a platform that can actually do this in a number of tissue types. We were pushing them really hard to look at things like hearing loss because that's a really interesting area. SR1's really into resurrection of sight, hearing loss, a number of other areas, but there just wasn't enough evidence that the biology was intact. It is in avian systems, but in human systems it's difficult to correlate that stimulation to get, hearing loss restored. Still not writing it off. There's new biology coming through that might draw us into hearing loss at some stage. And the business model is very much aligned with pharma. So small molecules, we understand them, we know how to develop them, and we know how to develop right on into drug development. So they're developing drugs to regenerate tissues. And what's been important for us is that they've done this with Promacta, but we set them the challenge when we put the seed investment in to go away and do this in other biological systems. And so we put 4.3 million in seed financing. Sounds like a large amount of seed financing, basically because we wanted to really understand this company better on our own. And then now we're looking very, very shortly to actually go out and widen this and do a big Series A Series A financing, and make it feel a little bit less like a GSK spin-out because it's on the SBC, it's been funded by SR1, it's something that GSK is interested in. GSK has no equity in this company. So in the true open innovation model, it's incubating this company with SR1's help in the SBC to see if the scientific hypothesis is actually going to grow from a really interesting thought into something real. So we've really demonstrated in 3 more tissue types, so chondrocytes in osteoarthritis, myocytes in muscle, and oligodendrocytes in MS, that they can find these rare progenitor cells, which if you can stimulate them with a small molecule, you could potentially be curative. And that is massive in this industry. It's going down a completely different paradigm. And what's interesting in GSK is that we've already thought commercially about what are the implications of discovering a curative drug. Because think about pricing, think about reimbursement. These are very complex areas when you're talking about maybe giving a month's treatment, generating the cartilage and regenerating that and curing that in that particular patient. How do you price and how do you reimburse that sort of treatment? So already the company, in a sort of scientific and commercial crow's nest sense, is looking 10 years out and saying, how are we going to actually manage with drugs that potentially could be curative rather than long term? And I think back to the first day that I joined GSK with Zantac. We generated a drug. You had to take 1 pill every day for life. It was the pharmaceutical dream, and it generated a £10 billion drug, $15 billion drug. Those days are gone. We're now looking at completely different treatment paradigms with rare diseases, with curative medicines, etc. So it's fascinating times from that perspective. So we're in the process at the moment of raising a very substantial Series A for this company with UK institutional and pharma investors. and hopefully we can get this on to the next stage and then into the clinic as fast as we can. It's early stage, it's a long way to go, a lot of risks associated with it, but what's fascinating, I'll come to in a minute, is that we, in the open innovation model, have got access to GSK technologies that's helping us really understand how these molecules are working. So, what about the open innovation model? Is it all it's cracked up to be? I have to admit, and nobody tweet this because otherwise I'll get in trouble. I've gone in trouble before with GSK when people have tweeted my comments at conferences. But the bottom line is, if you ask senior management in GSK what they mean by open innovation, you'll get 19 different answers, because it's really very much a poster child company that we've taken onto the SBC. But what they do get access to, they get access to shared facilities on the SBC. It's incredibly economically valuable as a venture capital investor to see a company be able to use very high quality shared services on an incubating science park such as the SBC. Also got access to GSK personnel. So they've been working with our regenerative medicine discovery performance unit personnel 50 metres across the street, going to lectures, sitting in the coffee room, working with these guys. It's almost like by osmosis, they've been picking up a lot of really interesting information around how their discovery programs are going. There is confidentiality, there are clear firewalls, but when we need to go over those, we do that in a very sort of controlled fashion. So there is no leakage of their confidential information. Many of you may know that within GSK we have Synova, which is our preclinical discovery services unit. So personnel have been providing services to Progenitor from that unit in thinking early about some of the real challenges of preclinical development, what you need to be looking for, thinking about CMC, regulatory, what's the target product profile going to look like, how are you going to develop this drug, and really thinking through some of those things that Big Pharma's fantastic at doing, and biotech increasingly getting very good at doing as well. We've had access to their bio and cheminformatics software platform, so we've been able to go in and really drill into the data and really understand what's going on. Access to ideas around animal models, recommended partners that GSK's used. You don't have to go through the triage process that's quite painful if you're a company starting up. Access to the knowledge for the people within GSK's R&D unit, just through a very open, innovative discussion. And for me as an investor, very profound is access to GSK's compound libraries. Now that is absolutely fundamental to our investment thesis with this company, because going out and buying some non-exclusive library from some random company, and actually I've got to be careful because I work for 3 that used to sell non-exclusive libraries to the industry, etc. These stem cell toolbox compounds have got very, very detailed target and biological pathway data behind them. So when they get hits, which they've already got in 2 out of these 3 areas, we can go and drill into those compounds and really understand which targets we're hitting, start to validate those targets. It's a great chemical starting point to then build a medicinal chemistry program from. And for me, this combination of access to big pharma with no strings attached is just a fantastic starting point for a biotech company. Now, you might say, what's in it for GSK? I mean, that's probably the big question that someone's going to throw at me. The answer is, it's in GSK's interest for us to have a thriving industry here in the UK, and having an open innovation model with a selected number of companies that can then get funded and then move on. It gives GSK an option to buy into them at some later stage with no strings attached. And obviously what we hope, and by the way, if Roche comes along tomorrow, Lilly comes along tomorrow, somebody else comes along tomorrow, buys the company or wants to do a collaboration, we're wide open to that. And it really is testing this open innovation model. Is the company real about giving open access to facilities and resources, and then actually taking the risk game of if we want to get access to it at a later stage, someone else might get there ahead of you. And I think that's the real test of this sort of open innovation model. So it's been a fascinating model for us. It's a bit of a poster child. It's in an interesting point now. I see it like a bit of a spotty teenager. It's grown up now. We need to sort of move out of the house and just get a little bit more non-GSK-like and probably do a collaboration with somebody else in the industry and access other funding and then move on. And you know what? If GSK wants to embrace us at some point in the future, absolutely fantastic. But really interesting model of open innovation in the real world working on a practical basis on a company level. So thank you very much.
Stay put for a minute, David. Just in case there's a quick question, I'll take one quick question. Yes, you were the first, I think, sir. Yeah.
So when I was at GSK a few years back and we started working on
inside knowledge
on personalised medicine, we had all the sales and marketing guys going, oh my God, you're going to restrict our market by segregating patients. How do you handle the sales and marketing guys now when you say you're working on a curative therapy that's not going to give you a lifelong sale of drugs?
Yeah, I mean, I sort of alluded to the fact that the guys are already thinking about pricing and reimbursement models in this sort of arena. So clearly the target product profile, the delivery of that is going to be quite profound. And I think it goes to the same question as to why do you go into rare diseases? You know, you've got limited patient populations, now a lot of pressure on pricing. But, you know, when I think about it, you know, in rare diseases, and I even think about this post-Zantac, we almost needed 3 drugs to replace Zantac in terms of revenue. Then you're going to need maybe 15 to 20 to replace the next generation and 30 to 40 to replace that. In this case, I think people will pay a lot of money. If you could cure osteoarthritis, I think there's going to be a real reimbursement argument that you could sit down with the reimbursement agency and say, we've got a fantastic argument here. The actual savings for the healthcare system would be absolutely massive. You know, it's a long vision and it's got a rocky road to get there, but it's one of the bets we've made in SR1 that we really see this whole thing of curative medicine as really dynamic. You raise a great question that it'll scare the life out of the sales and marketing guys because, you know, they want a round white tablet every day for life. That's just easy for them because they can do the maths, you know. It's a great question.
Okay, so thank you. We're going to move David off the stage before he says something he regrets and he gets tweeted by everyone.